Claire Bennett heard the woman laughing before she had fully closed the door behind her. She stopped in the entryway of the Tribeca penthouse, one hand still wrapped around the handle of her suitcase. Rain from London clung to the wheels. In her other hand was a shopping bag containing an expensive neck massager Ethan often mentioned needing and a box of limited edition cigars she had spent 2 months tracking down. She had imagined this moment for years. Her assignment in London was supposed to end in 7 days, but she had completed the final audit ahead of schedule and organized the first round of transition documents. She had taken the earliest flight to New York without telling her husband, turned down the company car, and come home alone. The plane had landed at 9:40 p.m. She had pictured herself opening the door and saying the 2 words she had been saving for 3 years. "I'm home." Instead, from beyond the decorative screen separating the foyer from the living room, she heard Madison Reed ask, "Do you really think Claire will sign the 5-year extension?" Claire's fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. Madison was not an intern or a junior assistant. She was 27, polished, media-savvy, and had been hired the year before as a brand communications manager at Cole Global. She knew how to control a room, how to soften an executive before delivering bad news, and how to make dependents look like charm. For the past 10 months, her name had appeared with increasing frequency on Ethan's travel schedules, gala guest lists, and internal event briefs. Claire had seen her in company photographs. She had never imagined Madison wearing slippers in Claire's home. Ethan's voice came from the living room, low and relaxed in a way Claire had almost forgotten he could sound. "Human Resources has already drafted the extension proposal," he said. "President of European Operations. Higher compensation. More equity. Once she accepts, I'll push it through the nominating committee and the board. She won't turn it down." But hasn't she always wanted to come back? What Claire wants is recognition. Ethan gave a quiet laugh. If she believes the entire European division depends on her, she'll stay. She always does what's best for everyone else. There was a pause. Then Madison asked, softer this time, "And what about us?" Fabric shifted against leather. Claire could picture Ethan pulling her closer. Once Claire signs the extension, what happens in New York won't concern her anymore. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the relief of a man setting down a burden. "Then no one will be in our way." The words were spoken lightly. They landed with extraordinary precision. Claire did not feel the room spin. She did not drop the gifts. She did not burst into tears or rush forward demanding answers. For the first time after a 10-hour flight and 3 years of waiting, she felt the floor beneath her feet with perfect clarity. Ethan had never included their reunion in his plans. She had believed she was protecting a piece of the future they were building together. He had been calculating how to use a better title, a larger equity grant, and her own sense of responsibility to keep her 8 time zones away. Claire looked down at her wedding ring. It was the same simple platinum band Ethan had given her 3 years earlier. Back then, Cole Global had only recently become profitable. He had apologized for not being able to afford a large diamond and promised that once the company was secure, he would make up for every sacrifice she had made. She had believed him for 7 years. For years of dating. 3 years of marriage. She had known him when Cole Global was still Cole Technologies, when 6 employees worked above a dry cleaner in Queens and Ethan sometimes slept under his desk. She had written early brand strategies, introduced him to clients, rewritten investor presentations at 2 in the morning, and negotiated the company's first major contract through contacts she had spent years building. Once, after a crucial investor meeting collapsed, Ethan had sat in a parking garage for 2 hours and admitted that he might not be able to keep the company alive. Claire had not offered empty encouragement. She had turned the failure into a 7-page analysis, repositioned the business, and spent the next 3 months visiting prospective clients with him. They secured their first round of institutional funding that spring. The company changed its name, moved into a Manhattan headquarters, completed several rounds of financing, and eventually went public. Claire's work was woven through every stage of its growth. She had never been a decorative wife standing behind a successful man. She had been there before the success existed. But as the company expanded, she stepped back into a professional role. She did not want anyone to believe she controlled the company through her marriage. Ethan began introducing her publicly as the head of European operations and rarely mentioned their early years building the company together. Over time, the omission became convenient. Eventually, even Ethan began acting as though Claire were simply an executive he had chosen and Cole Global had created. Madison laughed again from the living room. Claire lifted her hand from the door handle and took one silent step backward. She considered leaving the gifts on the entryway console. Then she stopped and picked them up again. They no longer belonged to Ethan. She closed the door without making a sound. The smart lock clicked behind her, small and final, like a period placed 3 years too late. In the elevator, her reflection looked pale but steady. Claire removed her ring and placed it in the inner pocket of her handbag. She did not throw it away. She did not crush it under her heel. The ring, like every other asset connected to the marriage, would be handled properly. She had already given Ethan too much. She would not give him one more impulsive decision that reduced the consequences he deserved to face. 3 years earlier, the European expansion had not been a lie. Cole Global had reached the limits of its domestic growth and needed someone who understood brand strategy, local partnerships, supply networks, and team building well enough to establish a real operation in London. The board had considered 4 candidates. Claire's experience placed her far ahead of the others. She understood Cole Global's business model because she had helped design its earliest version. She also had the discipline to build systems without constant oversight. By then, Cole Global had completed its public listing and several funding rounds. Ethan remained the founder and chief executive, but he no longer held absolute control. Senior regional appointments, major equity packages, and related party decisions required review by the nominating committee and approval from the board. Ethan had legitimate business reasons to choose Claire. That was what made everything afterwards so difficult to untangle. The night he asked her to go to London, he held her on the balcony of their new apartment and told her the European division would determine whether Cole Global became an international company or remained a successful American one. He also promised the separation would last only 3 years. When she returned, he said he would formally support her for a board seat and a global strategy role. He even circled the date on a calendar and joked that they would take 3 months off together afterward and travel wherever she wanted. Claire did not move to London for a meaningless title. She believed they were completing something together. She believed temporary distance would lead to a more equal future and a real marriage. For the first 6 months, Ethan called every day. Then the calls became weekly. Eventually, they were reduced to a few polite questions after quarterly reports. He was not completely unaware of what she was doing in Europe. The numbers appeared in every board packet. The London office began with 12 employees in a converted warehouse south of the Thames. Headquarters delayed promised resources. Budgets were tight. Local distributors distrusted an American company that had no record in the market. As managing director of European operations, Claire carried responsibility for hiring, budgeting, channel development, contracts, regulatory coordination, and team management. During her first year, she rebuilt the sales network and brought a division marked for possible closure to break even in 9 months. In the second year, her team secured a 5-year framework agreement with Northbridge Retail Group, giving Cole Global access to mainstream European distribution for the first time. In the third year, a competitor launched an aggressive price war. Claire spent 6 weeks living near the office, moving between crisis calls, supplier negotiations, and client meetings until she protected 3 of the division's most important accounts. Every quarter, those results appeared in Ethan's reports. What the reports did not show was the first winter, when a cross-border cash delay nearly caused the London office to miss payroll. Headquarters asked Claire to wait 5 business days. She knew several new employees could not absorb the delay. She used her own bonus as a temporary guarantee, then spent 2 days forcing finance to redesign the settlement process so the same problem could not happen again. She never told Ethan. Not because it did not matter, but because every time they spoke, someone seemed to be waiting behind him with another briefing. A countdown timer hovered in the corner of the screen, reminding her not to take too much of his time. She learned to turn "I had a terrible day" into "the issue is resolved." She changed "I miss you" into "get some sleep." Ethan interpreted her maturity as a lack of emotional need. He treated her independence as proof that she did not require companionship. At the end of her second year, Claire asked to rotate back to New York for 6 months. Ethan did not say no. He said the Northbridge contract was too important and promised they would discuss it when the agreement closed. After it closed, he said the corporate structure was being reorganized. She kept moving the return date until the original 3-year limit became the final boundary she still trusted. Ethan knew she was exceptional. He knew she was reliable. He knew she could solve almost anything placed in front of her. Because he knew, he began to treat her ability as a permanent corporate asset that required no maintenance. He praised the European team's execution in meetings without naming her. He accepted media congratulations when European revenue climbed, but did not ask whether she needed rest. He traveled to Europe twice for investor conferences, stayed only 2 days each time, and never visited her apartment. Claire felt the disappointment. She simply kept finding explanations for it. She told herself Ethan had been pulled too far into the machinery of the company they had built. Then Madison entered his life, and a real overseas assignment slowly became an exile with no planned end. Madison joined Cole Global 18 months before Claire returned. At first, she managed brand events. She was intelligent, energetic, and socially effortless. She knew how to make Ethan feel admired without asking him to examine himself. Their boundaries crossed 10 months later. At the time, Claire had just resolved the largest supply crisis in the European division's history. She was receiving intravenous fluids at a private clinic when she asked Ethan to call. He replied that he was at a brand celebration and could not talk. The next day, an internal photograph showed Madison sitting beside him in his suit jacket. Claire noticed. She accepted his explanation anyway. She had not been blind. She had simply been unwilling to admit that the marriage she had protected for so long had already been abandoned by the other person in it. The proposed 5-year extension was Ethan's second use of her loyalty. He knew she felt responsible for the team she had built. He knew she would not walk away easily. A larger role, more equity, and subtle pressure from the board might persuade her to sacrifice herself again. The project had been real. The profits were real. The promise that they would come back together was the only part that had never been true. Claire asked the driver to take her to a hotel in Midtown. Once inside the room, she did not delete photographs or send Ethan an angry message. She called Olivia Grant, the New York divorce attorney who had handled a contract matter for one of Claire's friends years earlier. It was almost midnight when Olivia answered. Claire described what she had heard in 4 minutes. Olivia did not ask whether she still loved her husband. She did not tell her to sleep on it. She asked 3 questions. Are you certain you want to end the marriage? Are you physically safe? Is there any immediate risk that marital or corporate assets could be moved? I'm certain. I'm safe. And I have copies of the records I'm legally entitled to keep. Then do not meet him alone, Olivia said. Tomorrow morning, I'll prepare a divorce petition, a proposed settlement, and an application for temporary financial restraints if we need one. Do not surrender legally protected assets just to prove you aren't interested in his money. Your earned compensation, deferred bonuses, marital equity, and share of jointly acquired property all need to be valued. Claire was silent. During the taxi ride, she had considered taking nothing and disappearing as quickly as possible. It had felt clean, almost noble. Now she looked at 3 years of project records on her laptop and understood that abandoning her rights would not make her stronger. Ethan had already benefited from her labor, loyalty, and absence. She was not required to subsidize his betrayal too. Handle it fairly, she said. I won't take more than the law and my contracts allow. But I won't waive anything either. Good, Olivia said. That's the correct approach. After the call, Claire logged into Cole Global's secure system. She archived contracts, approvals, and performance materials according to company policy. She did not copy customer lists or download proprietary files. She retained only her employment agreement, pay records, equity documents, publicly disclosed achievements, and evidence related to her personal compensation and legal rights. At 1 a.m, she sent a formal email to the corporate secretary, the chief human resources officer, and the European finance director. The email contained 3 points. First, she would not accept an extension of her overseas assignment or any related appointment. Second, she was submitting notice under her employment agreement and providing a 30-day written transition plan. Until any conflict of interest review was complete, she recommended that the deputy managing director oversee daily European operations. Third, because the chief executive might have an undisclosed personal relationship with an employee within his management structure, she requested an independent review by the board and the Ethics and Compliance Office. She asked to be removed from any decision chain affected by that review. She did not use the word affair. She did not describe the slippers, the laughter, or Ethan's relief at keeping her away. She stated only the facts relevant to corporate governance. Then she began separating her private life from his. She removed Ethan as her emergency contact, disabled location sharing, and changed the passwords on her private accounts. She did not erase their messages. She exported them and sent copies to Olivia. She activated instant alerts on their joint accounts and authorized Olivia to seek a temporary court order if any abnormal transfer occurred. She did not move marital funds on her own. Near dawn, she booked a flight back to London. Her original plan had been to spend 3 months in New York after the assignment, then assume a global strategy role at headquarters. She had never intended to abandon her career for marriage. She had simply wanted the long separation to end, so she and Ethan could learn how to live in the same city again. That plan no longer existed. Olivia arrived at the hotel the next morning with an associate and a stack of documents. She confirmed that there had been no threat, coercion, or physical danger in the home. Claire answered honestly. She would not exaggerate what had happened, but she would not minimize it either. The marriage contained betrayal, prolonged inequality, and Ethan's use of their personal relationship to assume she would accept another major professional sacrifice. They spent the morning reviewing assets. The Tribeca penthouse had been purchased after the marriage, with the down payment drawn from joint funds. Claire's European performance bonuses were earned compensation. Ethan's original founder shares remained his separate property, but restricted stock and distributions issued during the marriage required valuation. You can decide you don't want the apartment, Olivia said, but you cannot pretend you never owned part of it. Dignity does not require hiding the cost of someone else's choices. Claire decided Ethan could keep the penthouse if he paid her the independently assessed value of her share. She did not want to walk through its doors again. She also would not erase her contribution to buying it. By early afternoon, Claire had signed the divorce petition, a sworn financial disclosure, and a proposed settlement. Olivia would file in New York and arrange formal service. Signing today doesn't mean you'll be divorced tomorrow, Olivia warned. If he contests everything, this could take months. But once you decide to proceed, he cannot keep you married forever simply by refusing to cooperate. I understand. Claire did not need an immediate dramatic ending. She needed a lawful one that no longer depended on Ethan's consent. That afternoon, she left New York. As the plane pulled away from the gate, her phone remained silent. Ethan did not know she had been home. Claire watched the city recede beneath the clouds. For the first time in 3 years, she did not calculate the time difference or plan when to send her husband a landing message. Her time belonged to her now. The flight arrived in London just after dawn. Claire did not return to the executive apartment leased by Cole Global. Instead, she went to a small flat in Southwark that she had purchased 2 years earlier with her own bonus. At the time, she had told herself it was a practical investment. In truth, she had wanted one place that could not be taken away if her title changed. There were no photographs of Ethan in the flat. Nothing in the kitchen had been chosen for him. Morning light moved across the wooden floor, quiet and unfamiliar. Claire stood in the entryway for a long time before she realized she was inside the first home she had ever owned that did not require her to wait for someone else to return. She slept for 6 hours. When she woke, dozens of messages waited. The corporate secretary confirmed receipt of her notice. Employees in the European group chat were asking whether rumors of her departure were true. Claire did not use the moment to expose her marriage. She sent one response to the entire team. Until you receive formal instructions, continue under the existing operating structure. No personnel change should interfere with our obligations to employees, clients, or suppliers. The next morning, she held a leadership meeting and reduced the personal explanation to one sentence. I will be leaving Cole Global at the end of my notice period. Then she reviewed delegated authority, client risks, outstanding negotiations, and transition ownership. Irene Walsh, the deputy managing director, followed her into the corridor afterward with tears in her eyes. Is New York forcing you out? This is my decision, Claire said. No one should resign for me, and no one should treat clients as personal property. Protect the systems we built. Protect your own careers. Claire knew that if she hinted at leaving for a competitor, some people might follow. She also knew that would be wrong. She could end her marriage without using employees' livelihoods or clients' businesses as weapons. That was why every disruption that came later mattered. Claire did not destroy anything. She simply stopped filling every gap in the company for free. Ethan learned something was wrong 2 days after Claire left New York. The chief human resources officer and the corporate secretary entered his office together. Their expressions were controlled, their documents already organized. On his desk, they placed Claire's resignation notice, her transition plan, and her request for an independent conflict of interest review. Why didn't Claire speak to me first? Ethan asked. His first reaction was not fear. It was irritation. The HR chief did not answer the personal question. Ms. Bennett is entitled to submit notice directly under her contract. Because the complaint concerns an undisclosed relationship between the chief executive and an employee within his broader reporting structure, the board has directed you to recuse yourself from any decision regarding Madison Reed's compensation, role, discipline, or employment status. Ethan's expression hardened. He was accustomed to Claire understanding him before anyone else, absorbing the emotional cost, and then finding the solution least disruptive to the company. By going directly to the board, she had removed him from the center of the process. His instinct was to view it as pressure. Did she return to New York? The company has no access to her private travel information. After they left, Ethan opened the shared owner activity log for the penthouse smart lock. 2 nights earlier, at 10:47 p.m., Claire's fingerprint had opened the door. At 10:55 p.m., the door had closed. 8 minutes. His hand remained on the screen as every sentence from that night replayed with brutal clarity. She had come home. She had stood less than 30 feet away and heard the extension plan. She had heard Madison. She had heard him say no one would be in their way. For the first time, Ethan felt something close around his chest. He called Claire. The number did not connect. His messages failed. An email to her private account triggered an automatic response stating that all marital communication should be directed to Olivia Grant, counsel for Claire Bennett. This was not how Claire handled conflict. Even when disappointed, she had always asked whether there was another explanation. Now she had asked nothing. That evening, Ethan returned to the penthouse. After learning that compliance had opened a review, Madison had hurriedly removed her personal belongings. The living room was immaculate again, as if the previous night had never happened. Ethan stood in the foyer and retraced the path Claire might have taken. She had not entered the living room. She had not needed to. Madison's flowers still sat on the dining table. 2 used coffee cups waited near the sink. For the first time, Ethan saw the apartment through Claire's eyes, the sofa she had chosen, the lighting she had designed, the rooms she had once imagined sharing with him, all repurposed to prove that her absence suited him. He threw away the flowers and put the cups in a cabinet. Neither action removed the night from the apartment. Several of Claire's dresses still hung in the bedroom closet, untouched for 3 years. She had not returned to collect them. Not because she could not let go, but because they were no longer worth another minute of her time. The next morning, Madison entered his office carrying his usual coffee. Her face was pale. Ethan, Claire must have misunderstood. We can explain. She only heard part of a conversation. She doesn't have proof of anything. Leave. Madison froze. He looked up at her. Until the investigation is complete, do not enter my office or contact me privately. Follow the instructions from compliance. He could not fire her. Any employment action taken by him would be considered interference with the review. But for the first time, he understood how much access he had given her under the label of trust. Madison had attended management meetings beyond her role, used his private car, and charged personal dinners to brand events. More seriously, Ethan had never disclosed their relationship to the board. None of that could be dismissed as a temporary lapse in judgment. That afternoon, compliance interviewed them separately. Madison admitted the personal relationship, but insisted that every exceptional privilege had been offered by Ethan. The investigation had not reached a conclusion, but her statement prevented him from describing himself as the passive victim of her ambition. The truth was simpler. He had liked how easy she made him feel. Madison did not ask him about the future. She did not remind him of promises. She did not challenge his assumptions about the company. She praised what he had built. Claire's presence always carried the memory that Cole Global had not been built by him alone. He had mistaken that discomfort for a marriage without passion. In reality, an equal partner forced him to see his limitations, and he had chosen someone who allowed him to remain superior. 2 days later, the formal service packet arrived at Cole Global's headquarters. It included a divorce petition, a detailed financial disclosure, a proposed settlement, and notice of Claire's application for temporary restraints on unusual transfers of marital assets. Claire did not demand punitive damages. She did not seek control of Cole Global. She requested an equitable share of marital property, unpaid European performance compensation, contractually promised restricted equity, and confirmation of her separate investments and premarital assets. Every amount was documented. At the bottom of the petition was Claire's signature. No accusation. No emotional paragraph. No request for an apology. Ethan's first thought was still that she wanted to force him to yield. He wrote Olivia Grant a long email and asked her to forward his apology. Her reply arrived 20 minutes later. My client has read your message and will not respond. Please continue through counsel. Ethan instructed his staff to prepare a package that included a London residence, extended leave, and his formal support for Claire's nomination to the board. The proposals were generous. They were also built on the same old mistake. He was still deciding what would be best for Claire. He told himself 7 years could not disappear in 8 minutes. She was hurt. She wanted proof that he understood. If he went to London, ended things with Madison, and offered enough change, Claire would eventually come back. Then reality began dismantling that certainty one piece at a time. Claire's resignation did not cause the European division to collapse overnight. The systems she had built continued to function. Irene could manage daily operations. The finance team knew the reporting schedule. Employees did not walk out together. The real problems appeared in the parts of the business that could not be reduced to a checklist. Northbridge Retail Group postponed a 3-year renewal. The company did not breach its agreement. It invoked a key person change provision and requested a formal review of Cole Global's European leadership stability. 2 major suppliers increased their required security deposits. For 3 years, Claire had personally coordinated every emergency response. Without her, they wanted greater financial protection. 3 senior executives asked Human Resources for written clarification of the new governance structure. One of them stated plainly that if New York began bypassing the European leadership team, he would consider leaving. Claire had not taken those clients. She had not encouraged those executives to resign. Her transition documents identified each risk and recommended a response. The problem was that Ethan had spent years looking at final figures and assuming that anyone holding the same reports could produce the same results. The board called a special meeting. The chief financial officer projected 3 years of European performance across the conference room wall. Claire Bennett is not the only capable executive in the market, one director said. But no one currently at Cole Global can replace in 30 days the credibility she has built with clients, regulators, suppliers, and the European team. More importantly, this is not ordinary turnover. We are losing a core executive because of a governance failure. An independent director turned to Ethan. Was the 5-year extension approved by the board? Or did you assume that because Ms. Bennett is your wife, she did not need to make an independent career decision? The room fell silent. The meeting lasted 3 hours. The directors were not interested in whether Ethan's marriage had been romantic. They were interested in whether the chief executive had treated his spouse as an endlessly deployable corporate resource and whether his private relationship had distorted company decisions. The corporate secretary displayed the draft extension proposal. It had never been formally submitted. It had originated in Ethan's office and already contained compensation figures, a proposed title, and a 5-year term. There was no written confirmation that Claire wanted the role. "You were not appointing a machine," the independent director said. "She had the right to refuse. Because she was also your spouse, you had an even greater obligation to recuse yourself from the process, not use the marriage to assume consent." For the first time, Ethan heard his favorite phrase, "doing what was best for everyone," as other people heard it. Not as trust, as disregard for Claire's boundaries. After the meeting, Ethan remained alone in the conference room and reopened 3 years of European records. This time, he did not begin with revenue. In the first winter, Claire had led a negotiation while running a high fever. The meeting transcript showed her voice becoming hoarse before the final agreement was reached. During the supply chain disruption in the second year, she coordinated teams across 6 countries for 18 consecutive days and prevented every client from shutting down. In the third-year price war, she had postponed management bonuses to protect ordinary employee payroll. Each weekly report transformed exhaustion into an objective sentence and every crisis into a completed action item. Ethan had taken that restraint as evidence that she did not need care. Then he found an email from 2 years earlier that he had barely read. Claire had written that the long separation was beginning to damage their marriage. She asked him to reserve 1 week in the following quarter so they could live in the same place without meetings or official events. His reply had been one line. "Critical project period. We'll discuss it when things stabilize." 30 minutes later, she had answered, "All right. I understand." He had always liked those words from her. "I understand." Now they reflected back every time he had treated her concession as permission to ask for another one. A week later, compliance issued preliminary findings. Madison had used her relationship with Ethan to bypass approvals and receive travel and event privileges inconsistent with her role. She had not stolen confidential information, but she had repeatedly suggested to colleagues that she would soon enter senior management, creating tension within the team. The board kept her on administrative leave pending a formal hearing. Ethan was removed from all related employment decisions and ordered to appear before the governance committee. He could not solve the problem by blaming Madison. She had been ambitious, but Ethan had held the authority. Every exception had existed because he permitted it. The evening the preliminary findings were circulated, Ethan finally admitted Claire was not bluffing. She had not threatened him with customers. She had not leaked the affair to the press. She had not attempted to humiliate him publicly. She had simply stopped contributing herself. Only after she stopped did he see how much of his life and company had depended on her continuing to give. He canceled a week of meetings and told his assistant to prepare a flight to London. "Should I contact Ms. Bennett's attorney and request an appointment?" the assistant asked. Ethan almost said no. His first instinct was to appear at Claire's flat, force a conversation, and refuse to leave until she listened. Then he remembered that Claire had clearly directed all private communication through counsel. If he ignored even that boundary, his apology would be another form of control. "Yes," he said after a long silence. "Ask properly." Olivia replied the next day. Claire would agree to one meeting. The location would be selected by her legal team. The discussion would be limited to the divorce and the European transition. Any attempt at private contact would end the meeting immediately. Ethan read the email several times. Claire's willingness to see him did not mean she was softening. It meant she could now treat him as someone with whom she needed to close legal and professional arrangements. That frightened him more than anger would have done. A fine rain covered London when Ethan arrived at the law office near Fleet Street. Claire was already seated in the conference room. She wore a charcoal suit and had tied her hair low at the back of her neck. In front of her were the settlement proposal and the European transition checklist. The meeting had been arranged by both legal teams. The time, place, and permitted subjects had been confirmed in writing. This was the only personal meeting Claire had agreed to give him. Ethan sat across from her and realized that she did not look broken. She looked rested in a way he had not seen in years. Not happy exactly, but settled inside herself. "Claire," he began. She met his eyes. "Please use my name. Nothing else." He had nearly called her by the private nickname he had used when they were young. The correction returned them to the actual relationship between them. Ethan had rehearsed on the flight. Facing her, every sentence sounded inadequate. "I'll withdraw the 5-year proposal formally," he said. "If you ever want to return to New York, I will support your nomination through the proper board process. You can take as much leave as you need. Madison is suspended. I'm cooperating with the investigation, and I will make a formal statement recognizing that you built the European operation with your team. Those are things you should do, Claire said. They are not conditions you can offer in exchange for my return. His fingers tightened beneath the table. I know. I'm trying to tell you that I understand what I did. You understand what happened to the company after I left. She did not raise her voice. She did not sound bitter. That made the distinction sharper. You know Northbridge delayed renewal. You know the board is investigating you. You know work became more difficult when I stopped protecting every weak point before it reached you. But have you actually understood why I left? Because I betrayed you. Not only because of Madison. Claire placed a printed copy of her original London appointment letter on the table. The European assignment was real. I was qualified for it, and I do not regret accepting it. What destroyed our marriage was what you learned afterward. I could build the operation for you, and I would ask almost nothing from you as a husband. Ethan's face lost color. You benefited from my ability, she continued, and you benefited from my absence. You turned my responsibility to the team into a tool for extending the assignment. You treated my love for you as a guarantee that I would never refuse. Rain tapped softly against the glass. You didn't exile me once, Ethan. Every time you dismissed a conversation, every time you assumed I would stay, every time you used my sense of duty instead of asking what I wanted, you sent me away again. He looked down. I can change, he said. I can restructure my schedule. I can spend part of every month in London. I can step down as CEO if that's what it takes. 7 years should not end like this. Claire watched him for several seconds. You want to change now because I finally stopped cooperating with the life you designed for me. I love you. Perhaps you miss what I made possible. The words were quiet. You miss the version of Claire who kept your company and your private life functioning while asking for almost nothing. That woman no longer exists. Ethan lowered his head. When he spoke again, his voice was unsteady. Is there truly no chance? No. There was no hesitation. Love is not an unlimited line of credit, Claire said. I kept extending it because I believed we were carrying the weight together. Now I know I was carrying it alone. She pushed the settlement proposal across the table. Marital property will be valued under New York law. I will not touch your original founder shares or seek control of Coal Global. I will not surrender the European compensation I earned, the restricted stock that vested under my contract, or my share of the penthouse. The corporate investigation and the divorce are separate. You can negotiate in good faith or a court can decide. Ethan opened the document. The terms were not punitive. They also did not protect his pride. Claire was taking back what she had earned and what the law recognized as hers. I will complete the transition through the end of my notice period, she said. I will not approach Coal Global's clients, use its information, or recruit its employees. After that, where I work and how I live will not concern you. Do you already have another position? That is not part of today's discussion. Claire stood and gathered her papers. Ethan rose too. May I see you again? Her expression contained neither hatred nor the tenderness he remembered. We will complete any required steps through counsel. Beyond that, there is no reason to meet. At the door, Ethan said, I'm sorry. For the first time, he did not add come back. He did not invoke 7 years as a debt she owed him. Claire paused, but did not turn around. I accept that you understand you were wrong, she said. I do not accept that as a reason to return to you. The door closed gently behind her. That night, Ethan sat alone in his hotel room until dawn. For the first time, he did not plan a more persuasive offer. He finally understood that chasing someone was not the same as respecting them. If every gesture still aimed to make Claire return, then his needs remained at the center of the story. The next morning, he authorized his attorney to begin formal settlement negotiations and confirmed in writing that he would not contact Claire privately. It was not the beginning of reconciliation. It was the first time he stopped standing in the way of her departure. The divorce took 4 months. Ethan did not challenge service or use corporate lawyers to create delay. After 2 rounds of financial disclosure and independent valuation, he accepted a fair settlement. Claire received the assessed value of her share in the Tribeca penthouse, unpaid compensation from the European assignment, and restricted stock units she had already earned during the 3-year service period, but which were scheduled for delivery in the 4th year. She did not receive Ethan's controlling interest in Coal Global. She did not ask for assets beyond her legal and contractual rights. The final mediation took place by video conference. Claire sat in Olivia's London office. Ethan sat in New York. Their attorneys reviewed each provision. When the mediator asked whether both parties accepted the agreement voluntarily, Ethan looked at Claire's image on the screen. For a moment, he seemed to want to say something personal. Claire waited without prompting him. "I accept," he said. It was the last meaningful choice he could make in the marriage, not a decision that she should stay, but an acknowledgement that he had no right to keep her from leaving. When the court entered the final judgment, Claire was preparing to speak at an industry conference. Olivia sent the order electronically. Claire read it, replied received, and walked onto the stage. There was no storm, no music, no dramatic collapse. 7 years ended in a legal document, and Claire's life continued moving. Ethan stared at the signed settlement before authorizing the final transfer. He had once believed money and titles solved every problem. Now he understood that the settlement did not compensate Claire for her love. It returned property and compensation that had always been hers. The corporate investigation ended several weeks later. Coal Global terminated Madison for repeated approval violations, improper use of company funds for personal events, and misuse of internal access. The company also announced stronger conflict of interest controls and mandatory disclosure requirements for senior executives. Ethan faced consequences as well. The board canceled his annual bonus, expanded independent director oversight, and prohibited him for 1 year from direct involvement in appointments connected to family or personal relationships. He did not present himself as an innocent executive manipulated by a younger employee. Before the governance committee, he admitted that every crossed boundary had existed because he allowed it. Madison had been calculating, but Ethan held the greater power and therefore the greater responsibility. The European division survived. The systems Claire left behind carried it through the most unstable period. Coal Global still paid for its failures. 2 projects were delayed, 1 major contract was reduced, and European profit declined sharply in the following quarter. Eventually, the company hired a new regional leader and began rebuilding trust. A large company did not disintegrate because one person left. But gaps in leadership, weak governance, and trust that had been used without renewal required real time and real money to repair. Claire's value had never been that everyone became incompetent without her. It was the judgment, reputation, and credibility she had accumulated over 3 years, none of which could be transferred by changing a name on an organizational chart. Claire completed her 30-day transition and left Coal Global. She honored her confidentiality obligations. She did not approach clients or recruit former employees. During a 6-month non-compete cooling period, she took courses, traveled, and learned to leave her work email closed on weekends. Recovery was not clean or linear. Some nights, an old song reminded her of the apartment where she and Ethan had built their first investor deck. In a grocery store, she once reached automatically for the coffee he preferred and stood with her hand suspended above the shelf. Letting go was not a switch that created permanent relief. Claire simply remembered, each time nostalgia tried to rewrite the past, the certainty in Ethan's voice when he assumed she would sacrifice another 5 years. She allowed herself to grieve. She no longer confused grief with a reason to return. She began therapy. During one session, the therapist asked, "What do you enjoy when you are not solving a problem for someone else?" Claire could not answer. For 7 years, she had measured herself as a wife, a partner, a founder, and an executive. She had almost forgotten that she could do something simply because she liked it. So she took a ceramics class. She hiked in Scotland. On a rainy Saturday, she turned off her phone and watched 2 old films without checking a single notification. None of those things improved a quarterly result. They slowly returned her to herself. During the final property inventory, the wedding ring was confirmed as Claire's personal property. She sold it and donated the proceeds to a fund providing legal support to women working overseas. It was not revenge. It was an ending. 1 year later, Claire opened a cross-border brand and operations consultancy in London. She did not use Cole Global's client data. She did not recruit her former team. Her first opportunities came from public industry presentations and the professional reputation she had built over many years. The company employed 9 people. Its office was modest compared with Cole Global's European headquarters. But the name on the glass belonged to her. Every decision was made without asking permission from a man who had mistaken her sacrifice for an unlimited resource. Before opening, Claire hired counsel to review the business plan line by line. She excluded any prospect that might create a conflict with her former employer and documented the independent source of every lead. She refused to let anyone explain her success by claiming she had stolen Cole Global's resources. Her first major contract came from a Scandinavian consumer brand that had never worked with Cole Global. The company's chief operating officer told her they had chosen Claire after hearing her speak at a conference about trust in cross-border teams. "We hired you because of the way you think," he said. "Not because of the company you used to work for, and certainly not because of whom you used to be married to." After the contract was signed, Claire sat alone in her office for several minutes. The agreement was far smaller than the deals she had negotiated for Cole Global. It was also the first major piece of trust awarded entirely to her company, her judgment, and her name. On opening day, a senior executive from Northbridge Retail Group sent white tulips. The card contained no promise of business and no attempt to avoid contractual boundaries. "Thank you for earning our trust through your professionalism. We look forward to meeting again in a new capacity when the rules allow." Claire placed the card on a shelf. She did not need to celebrate her life as a victory over Ethan. A new beginning did not require her former husband to fail. Its value came from no longer needing his regret to confirm her worth. In New York, Ethan remained chief executive of Cole Global. He became quieter. He stopped allowing staff to soften the language around his private decisions. Each time a European quarterly report reached his desk, he remembered the years when he had seen only results and not the person producing them. Occasionally, Claire appeared in industry news. She stood on stages discussing governance, international teams, and sustainable growth. Her biography did not identify her as Ethan Cole's former wife or a former executive at Cole Global. It listed only her name and the company she had founded. Ethan never contacted her again. Not because he had forgotten her. Because he had finally learned to respect the word no. Claire stopped wondering whether he regretted losing her. Once, she had crossed 8 time zones to protect a marriage. Later, she remained in London to recover the part of herself that marriage had consumed. The European assignment had been real. The work had been real. She refused to define the most important 3 years of her career as wasted simply because Ethan had betrayed her. She had lost a relationship that no longer deserved to continue. She kept her ability, her career, her boundaries, and the freedom to choose what came next. Fog covered London outside the windows of her new office. Claire saw her reflection in the glass and remembered the woman who had left New York 3 years earlier, convinced that enough effort could guarantee a happy ending. She did not judge that woman for being foolish. That willingness to believe and carry responsibility had taken her through the hardest years of her life. It had also taught her something more important. Loving another person could involve sacrifice. Loving herself required limits. Claire turned away from the window and walked toward the conference room. A new client was waiting. This time, she was not protecting someone else's empire. She was building a world of her own.